I hear it every day. Why do you trim it so much? Why don't you just use salt and pepper? Why don't you cook low and slow? Why do you spritz? I didn't use binders. Grandpa never made it that way. I've had enough of that. Now, there's many reasons why I do all the things that y'all were complaining about, like trimming and binders and spritzing and all those things. There's many reasons why I do them. A lot of them are for self-convenience, but also for enhancement of flavor and enhancement in the outcome of that protein being cooked and served to my family and friends. Consistency and flavor are going to be peak and most important in everything that I do. However, after all the complaining and comments that I get from you guys, I'm going to go ahead and try it out. Now, don't get me wrong. I think 15, 16 years ago, this is probably how I cooked a brisket, and there's a reason why I don't do it anymore. But y'all's fault. I got to do it. I got to do it now. I just had to. So this actually started about 26 hours ago. 26 hours, folks. Number one, that's why I don't like doing low and slow. 26 hours on an offset cooker, that's a lot of work. I've got a lot of stuff to do. That's a long time to be babysitting a fire. 26 hours, over a day. 26 hours ago, I was super uncomfortable opening up this brisket, laying it down on the board, and getting it coated with just salt and pepper. Now, I use fine grade salt, table salt, because I want those molecules to seep down into that brisket and give it as much flavor as possible. And because we're not trimming, all that fat is going to be in the way, and it's going to inhibit smoke penetration and salt penetration. So I got to get as much flavor on the outside of this brisket as possible. So we hit it hard and heavy with salt and pepper, especially that salt. From there, we went and got our pit started up. Now I like to start with a little bit of lump charcoal and get a good bed of hot coals going. From there, I lay my splits on top. After about 30-45 minutes, my pit was up to temperature, the brisket had started sweating, and it was time to go ahead and throw it down. Now, I'm going to put it on there the same way that I do every other time when I do trim and do a brisket normal for me, and that's going to be point facing the fire on the smokestack side away from the firebox. So that heat is going to hit the fattiest part of this brisket, and that's going to give it a little bit of insulation. I'm going to leave this thing alone and just maintain temperature with a fire for about 2.5 hours. After 2.5 hours, we came out and checked on the brisket, and it's looking pretty decent. I did notice some of those areas that I wanted to trim up so badly have started to unfold. The unevenness of seasoning is going to be shown there, and I'm afraid that part's going to get really, really well done because of the lack of aerodynamics that it has. So I'm going to be running my fire very, very carefully to prevent this. We're going to check back on it in another 2 to 3 hours. Another 2.5 hours passed, and now we're 5 hours into this cook, guys. This is about the time I'm spritzing normally, and in all honesty, I'm probably going to spritz it and wrap it up and put it to finish off in the next hour or two if I was cooking it normally. But because we're cooking so low and slow with no trim, there's so much mass there, and I'm not spritzing, I just want to check on it. I noticed something with this fat. It's almost getting wrinkly, and so what I think is happening is the outside of that fat has created a membrane. It's gotten tough. That salt has hardened it up, kind of like when you do a whole hog and you cover that skin with salt, it gets all crispy. It's created a membrane, and that fat underneath is rendering down. Now, it's not rendering into the meat. It's not possible for fat to render down into the meat, but I am catching a ton of tallow in my grease drippings, so it's rendering down, and I think that will affect the moisture, Not because the fat melts into the meat and makes it more moist, but when that meat is basted in fat from that tallow melting down, it does prevent moisture from evaporating off the outside of the brisket, so off the surface. So it'd be interesting to see how that turns out, but I am starting to see it kind of getting wrinkly, and we're going to check on it in another 3 or 4 hours. After another 4 hours, we're now 9 hours into this cook, and the bark is starting to really set up nicely. I'm not seeing any pulling on the outside, which I think attributes to because of the way that fat is. It's not letting moisture escape through the surface. It's keeping it inside. My only worry with that is it's going to be roasty, kind of tastes like a roast, you know, instead of like a brisket. But I'm noticing no pulling. It's starting to build a great bark. So I'm going to leave it alone for another 4, probably 5 hours. Four hours later, now we're 13 hours into this cook, and the bark is set up really, really nicely. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this with some foil. I haven't checked internal temperatures with it yet. I'm not going to even probe this for ITs. I'm not going to go off temperature because a lot of you guys are saying your grandpa never used a thermometer, a temperature probe, or anything like that. He just went off feel. So that's what I'm going to try to do. If it goes well, if it doesn't. So we get this wrapped up. Our bark's nice and pretty. Wrap it up nice and tight. I do double layer this foil because I don't want to lose any of that moisture or that broth that we may be making, and see how it goes. We're going to finish this off in the smoker until I can squeeze the bottom. And I don't know the best way to describe this except for after you've felt a good brisket that you know is done, and you can feel on the meat side, on the flat side, and you can feel the bottom and it's soft, almost like you can just pull the thing apart, then that's how you know it's done. And we're just going to cook this until we have that feeling. 2 hours ago would be hour 24. I reached in and started folding this brisket, and it feels like it's done. So I pulled it out, put it on a pan, and just let it sit on the countertop for 2 hours. Then we're ready to open it up. That was 26 hours for this cook in total, and now I'm ready to open it up. So let me bring you down in here. We're going to get this brisket opened up. We're going to slice into it. I'm going to taste it and give you my honest opinion. There's no reason for me to lie about this, and I want you to be able to see exactly how it slices. So we're going to focus the camera right there on it. Ooh. Okay, you see that? See that fat, the outside of that fat? That tells me that it caramelized during the cook and stuck to the paper. That's very tempting to take a bite out of that, to be completely honest with you. All right. So the bark looks outstanding, looks really well. You can see how when I press on that, see those wrinkles and how soft it is underneath? It's like there's just this layer. See how that is? It's like there's a layer on it. Get some gloves on. Get this out of this foil so we can cut it in half and see what it looks like. Bend over and cough. Very soft on the underside still. Yeah, not as much au jus or tallow as I thought there would be, unless it already just all leaked out. But all right, let's cut into it about halfway. This is just a massive brisket, I think, to begin with. No trim. See how it did. Fat rendered down decently. This fat not so much. Very juicy. Got some good color to it. Decent smoke ring on the bottom, that you can see that bottom stuck to the grates quite a bit. All right. Nothing to be mad at. I feel a little bit hard or crispy right here around these edges. This is something I would normally cut off in a trim. I'm not sure I would serve that to anybody, so it's going to get cut off anyways. See how dark that is? That's too much heat got to that thin piece of meat. That's not much meat, but I mean, that's, see how well that fat renders? I just barely touch it. But see how that outside skin almost turned into a membrane there? All right, let's cut a few slices out of this sucker. Tender. All right. So this looks like an old-fashioned brisket that you would get at one of these places down in Central Texas. Probably not a top 50 place that serves it this way. Very tender. I may have overcooked it a little bit. Again, I was going by feel, but not mad about it. I'd rather it be tender than tough. Let's go ahead and give it a taste. Yeah, it's underwhelming. To be completely honest with you, there's not much flavor there. It's very pot roasty. I was worried that that's how this was going to turn out, very pot roasty. I used a ton of salt. It didn't soak in. I mean, there's not much flavor there at all. With that long, slow cook, even the pepper had been mellowed down to you can't really taste it. It needs salt and pepper. Now, this isn't a waste of a brisket because it does still have brisket properties. It's just not what I'm used to. It's just not up to the quality that I'm used to. I'm sure for people who have brisket twice a year that their grandpa cooks, this will be just fine. But somebody eats it pretty often, has had some of the best in the world, this just ain't it. It's okay, but it's not great. The good thing is it's not wasted. I can use this in tacos. I can make different macaronis with it, things like that. It makes a great base because all the other seasonings won't overpower it that way in the rest of the dish. So this is not going to go to waste. But I do want to taste a piece with that fatty on it. So let's taste it. That is better. It's just not very appetizing to have that much fat in your mouth. But it does have a better flavor for sure. I don't think this was an absolute fail. I think it just further reinforces why I trim, why I do more than just salt and pepper, why I spritz, and all that. And I'll be honest with you, and this probably can't be proven until I do like 10 or 15 of these, which I do not plan on doing, but it does not seem more moist. In my experience, when something turns out like a pot roast, it's less moist than a brisket would. And that's how this turned out. I don't know if that's because maybe I overcooked it, just went by feel instead of temperature, but I don't know. I'm going to offend a lot of people by saying this, but if this is how your grandpa made brisket, the brisket isn't that great. Sorry. I've learned a lot of things over the last 15 years of cooking, and I've learned that trimming is huge. I've also learned that how you season is huge. I've also learned that relative humidity in your cook chamber, to include that humidity you introduce by spritzing, is huge. The outcome of your brisket is massively dependent on those things. You also need to realize that consistency is key in the outcomes of your brisket. I hope this helps you out, guys. I'm not going to waste this. I'm going to use this in tacos and macaroni and street corn and all kinds of stuff for some videos coming up. Again, it's just a base flavor. It's not going to be overpowered when I add all the spices for the rest of the dishes that way. I hope it helps. I love you guys. Drink more water. Make sure you like and subscribe.